good evening. I'm so delighted to be here in Chicago, or as we in Madison like to call it, UW-Madison Southeast, because our largest alumni group is right here in this city. You know, when I come down here for alumni events, it's just like being in Madison. I also want to give a special thank you to Dean Dantley. It really is a special privilege for me to be giving his first Wozniak lecture. Now, I'm going to tell you, if I'm not any good, one of the things you can say is, well, he'll get better, right? You know. I also want to thank all of the support people who literally make this possible. You know, it's one thing to be here and say, look like it's all pulled together, but it requires people behind the scenes to make it happen. So I want to especially thank Jean Pierce-Ritter and Sandra Graham for their incredible help with this. So can I? Okay. So about 11 years ago, as my daughter was entering her senior year of high school, our house was inundated with the modern phenomenon known as the college or university view book. Given her strong PSAT and SAT scores, she was sought out by many high-quality institutions. On the other hand, my sons, much older than their sister, were not wooed in the same way. One was an athlete, and so he received his school contacts via football coaches. And the other was quite fortunate to be able to go to one of the local California state universities. However, in the case of my daughter, every day a new set of glossy catalogs arrived advertising the wonders of the schools. We learned the number of Nobel laureates, or the booming construction of new laboratories, or the wonderful student-teacher ratios that these institutions had. Just looking at these view books made me want to go back to college. She received so many that we had to get a crate and hanging files to keep them straight. One day, she received the view book from the University of Colorado Boulder. And unlike most of the others, this one sat on our kitchen island for many days, instead of being perused and then placed alphabetically in the box. So after more than 2 weeks of passing by the Colorado View book on my kitchen island, I finally asked my daughter, "Aren't you even going to look at this one? It's been sitting in the same place for weeks." And at that moment, she looked at me and declared, "Oh, those people aren't serious about education. They're just selling mountains." Now, I actually know enough about UC Boulder to know that indeed it is a serious educational institution, and that the Colorado View book doesn't fully reflect its mission and purpose. But her statement, "Those people aren't serious about education," provides for me an important rubric for thinking about how we might begin to prepare our teachers, both at the K-12 and collegiate level, for better serving what I want to call new century students. I think we have to prove to students that we are indeed serious about education. Now, I also have to kind of insert here our Loyola experience. With my sons, the rule was they had to go at least 250 miles away from me. I literally took a map and a compass, and I said, "You can't go to any schools inside the circle," right? And they were, "Well, why not?" I said, "Because I don't want to wash your laundry, and I don't want you showing up unexpectedly at my dinner table. You're going to have to think about whether or not you're going to come home." But she's the only girl, and she is the baby. And so Dad didn't want her to go too far. So Loyola was like a really good choice, and she had these great grades and test scores, and they sent her a wonderful letter and said she was eligible for this great scholarship, and they invited her to a orientation meeting. So we got in the car and drove down here, and I made the classic parent mistake. I got all enthusiastic about it. Oh man, I was like, oh, this is the place, and it's not that far, and you could get home okay, and look at the downtown campus, girl. We can go to Marshall Fields. And I played all the orientation. I even won a lanyard. I started to bring that lanyard. I was into this thing. And I should have just held back, because on the road back, she said, I don't think I want to go there. So to any parents, don't express any opinion about any place they want to go. Just kind of nod and go along with it. I want to talk a little bit about the work I've been doing for more than 20 years. I've been investigating teachers who are successful with those students that we tend to think of as miserable failures in our current school system. And in general, we look at the data, we can agree that African American students are performing worse than any other group. And I came to call this work culturally relevant pedagogy. It serves as a theoretical construct for explaining the kind of education that is more likely to ensure the success of most students, particularly those students who traditionally have been underserved by our schools. The notion of culturally relevant pedagogy involves three propositions: supporting students' learning, or what we might call academic achievement, developing cultural competence, and encouraging socio-political consciousness. Now, I also need to kind of insert in here, before I came to Wisconsin, I used to teach on the faculty of Santa Clara University. So I know the tradition. And it's really interesting to me that sometimes students would object to being pushed around some issues of justice and social welfare, and I would explain to them, have you read the mission of the institution? I said, because I'm four square with this doctrine right here. I don't know what the business school is doing, but I can tell you that the Jesuits have always made this commitment to social justice, so I'm okay. So I want to briefly describe what I mean by each of these and how it applies not only to K-12 students, but also to those we want to cultivate as teachers, who can implement culturally relevant teaching in the classroom. So the notion of supporting student learning is the first proposition, and in some ways it appears so obvious that it may seem unnecessary to talk about it. But I want to make the point that much of what happens in classrooms, especially college and university classrooms, has little to do with what students learn. Instead, the focus is on what teachers cover. Many of my colleagues are proud that a certain number of their students do not pass their courses. They associate high failure rates with increased rigor. In other words, I'm tough. It's going to be hard to pass Chemistry 103, right? They see their courses, and I talked about this with the students earlier, as sieves that allow only a small percentage of the students to get through. But a culturally relevant approach sees student learning as the goal for every student. So rather than creating a sieve, culturally relevant teachers create a net designed to catch up all the students. The goal is not coverage, it is mastery. It's one of the reasons why these MOOCs, the massive online open classrooms, are so popular, because people can engage with them through and master subject matter. And if you get stuck somewhere, you can join another MOOC, or you can go back. And so, in fact, I've been actually recommending them to some of my undergraduates who are struggling with things like organic chemistry. I'm like, find a MOOC, because you won't be graded in it, but you will have the opportunity to maybe learn that information and that material in a different way. So one of the courses that I offer is entitled Culturally Relevant Pedagogy. And one of the tasks in that course is to go observe teaching in some place other than the School of Education. My presumption being that people in the School of Ed can teach. Now, I realize I'm making a great assumption, but I don't say don't go see so-and-so. I just say you can't go to the School of Education. You can go anywhere you want to. And they're encouraged to go to other professional schools. They can go to the law school, the business school, School of Agriculture, Life Sciences. Or they can go to other parts of the university, the College of Letters and Science, human ecology. I even encourage them to look at teaching in non-traditional settings, such as a swim class, or Tai Chi, or yoga, or athletic coaching. A few years ago, one of my students did her observation of teaching in the medical school's cadaver lab. What she described was an excellent example of a teacher who was focused on mastery, not coverage. The lab was comprised of students in groups of 8. And 2 of the students in each group had been in the lab earlier, a day or so before, and completed the lab on the renal system. Their task was to teach the renal system to the other 6 students. The medical professor and a mortician were in the lab observing, going from group to group, but they were not doing the teaching. The 2 student teachers were detailed and meticulous about their teaching, quizzing the students in their group throughout and checking to make sure every student fully understood the renal system. The reason the students were so careful with their group members was that the medical professor would eventually choose 2 of the students in their group, not the ones that they had taught, to take the lab exam for the entire group. The grade these 2 students received would be averaged and given to everyone in the group. So my student observing this said, you should have heard, they were like, you really understand this? Really? Do it again. Are you sure? And she said, I couldn't figure out why these people, they were like badgering the students, right? But they wanted to make sure they fully understood everything because the stakes here were pretty high for them. But the reason why that was an interesting and ingenious way to teach was that the medical school is looking for maximum competence from its soon-to-be doctors, not coverage from its professors. What might it mean for us to develop teachers who demanded this kind of high-level performance from all students? The second component of culturally relevant pedagogy is perhaps the most misunderstood. When I use this term, I'm referring to one's ability to be firmly grounded in his or her culture of origin and fluent in at least one other culture. For most students of color, this generally means that they develop a deep understanding and appreciation of their own heritage, history, language, and customs, while also accessing the mainstream culture. White middle-class students are not exempt from developing cultural competence. And although schools typically cater directly to their culture, they too need to be fluent in at least one other culture. In an ideal world, all students would leave school multiculturally competent and able to deal facilely with the cosmopolitan, global world in which they will find themselves. At minimum, every student should leave school at least biculturally competent. But how can we develop culturally competent students if our teachers are culturally incompetent? The third component of culturally relevant pedagogy, socio-political consciousness, is the most ignored. Teachers understand the need to ensure student learning, and some are sympathetic to supporting students' cultural competence. However, the idea of helping students engage directly in the social and civic concerns of their schools and communities, localities, the nation, and the world seems beyond the scope of classroom teachers. In plain English, though, I think of this component as the so what factor. Our students regularly ask us why they have to learn a particular thing. And we regularly respond with, because you're going to need this one day. But by about fourth or fifth grade, they realize we're lying. And those who are savvy learn, or should I say, memorize what we teach to pass our tests and to pass our classes. Those who are less plugged into education resist, and they resist in ways that are detrimental to their own academic well-being. So a culturally relevant approach to teaching helps students understand that their learning can be and should be connected to the everyday problems of living in a society that is deeply divided along racial, ethnic, linguistic, economic, environmental, social, political, and cultural lines. And they should be learning that education can and should help alleviate these problems and these divisions. That's the whole point of what Thomas Jefferson had in mind when he talked about the need for an educated citizenry. So I'm going to talk now about the evolution of culturally relevant pedagogy, because I stand here now more than 20 plus years past my first inquiries into culturally relevant pedagogy. And I find that the notion of culturally relevant pedagogy, at least my understanding and practice of it, is evolving in some new and exciting ways. And those new ways are what I want to focus the remainder of my remarks on. How culturally relevant pedagogy can meet the needs of new century students and their teachers, regardless of level, that is from elementary through graduate education. So first, I have a question for you. How many of you are on Twitter? Okay. It doesn't surprise me that those are hands of mostly young people that went up. If you are, that's great. If you're not, you are already behind the curve regarding new century students. We are looking at the most technologically astute, plugged in, globally connected generation the world has ever seen. However, when I walk into most schools, I see signs throughout admonishing the students against cell phone use. In a school I attended a couple summers ago in Indianapolis, I walked into a classroom that had a sign on the door that said, "No cell phones, no cell phones, no cell phones." And I really wanted to scream at the top of my lungs and say, "It's not a cell phone, it's a computer." And as I said to the students earlier, them old school flip phones that the teachers have, now that's a cell phone. You know, still got the factory ring. Okay, that's my husband. All right, I won't let him get it. I won't let him get a smartphone. He got one once. I said, take it back, because number one, you're gonna break it, and number two, you won't know how to use it. So, but there's a totally different understanding in this generation of devices, and that's but one example of how new century students are different from their counterparts of earlier generations. Each year, Beloit College in Beloit, Wisconsin, conducts what it calls the Mindset List for its incoming freshman class. The class of 2016, which is a couple years ago, had a mindset list that includes the following. One, they have always lived in cyberspace, addicted to a new generation of electronic narcotics. They don't even know what you're talking about when you say before the internet. They're like, what? For them, it's Michael Jackson's family, not the Kennedys, that constitute American royalty. If they miss The Daily Show, they can always get their news on YouTube. For them, Bill Clinton is a senior statesman of whose presidency they have little knowledge. They have never seen an airplane ticket. For them, women have always piloted warplanes and space shuttles. For them, Star Wars has always been just a film, not a defense strategy. They have come to political consciousness during a time of increasing doubts about America's future. The Twilight Zone involves vampires, not Rod Serling. And they watch television everywhere but on television. So I have a New Century person living with me. I don't know how to characterize her. I think the law says she's an adult. But basically, if you live in my house and I pay all your bills, you're still an adolescent, all right? And she commandeers our family room, which has the best TV, but she never turns the TV on because she's at her device, getting all the information she wants to get. And I've just shared for you 10 of about 75 items on the mindset list to underscore how rapidly new technologies have widened the generation gap. So aging baby boomers like me, who have always considered themselves hip and cool and with it, are struggling to connect with Generation Y students who will eventually teach what I'm calling New Century students. Now, I haven't conducted a scientific study of New Century students, but I have made what I think are some testable observations about them as learners. And I think we have to consider these tendencies as we evaluate our teaching. They believe in that multitasking is an efficient way to work. Now, our psychologist friends have told us it's not, but that's not going to stop them from having the computer, the handheld, being on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, and doing their homework all at the same time. They see themselves more as consumers than students. And as such, they are either purchasing an education or shopping for schools. I had an interesting experience with a student because, of course, they are buying this education. And she was upset because, if you're going to buy it, the last thing you want to buy is a C, all right? I'm buying A's and B's. I don't know what you're talking about, woman. And so I was trying to explain to her why she had not warranted, what she produced had not warranted an A or a B. And in a fit of pique, she said to me, "Well, I'm paying your salary." I said, "No, sweetheart, I'm subsidizing your education because you can't actually afford me." But this notion that, I'm shopping, I'm buying, and quite frankly, we as institutions, as administrators, we're feeding into this, right? I mean, that's the view book thing. I got to sell this to them. They receive their news and information, as I said earlier, via push notices from their favorite internet sites and blogs and programs like The Daily Show. And although they're heavily invested in social justice, they are less sanguine about social welfare, particularly if they have to bear the cost. And it's really interesting to me because, I'm a child of the 60s where I was just, we gotta help the poor, we gotta help. So these are students who, on the one hand, they'll say we need to help the poor, but I don't want to pay anything for this. So they don't like things like health care because it's like, you're trying to make me buy this stuff, and I don't need this, and this is just helping these old people. And I always have to remind them, I said, well, who paid the bill when you were born? Somebody's been paying for you up to now, and just trying to get them to understand, or their pushback against something like Social Security. Right? We just paying for a bunch of old people. Well, when you get old, there'll be somebody paying for you. That's how the system works. So they have a very different standpoint towards social welfare. This one is important for the faculty, and that is for them, email is an old technology, and they would prefer to communicate via instant messaging and tweets, so that's why they don't answer your email, because they don't read email. They don't answer anybody's email. For them, library research can best be done on their desktop, which means they rarely leaf through an entire journal. Now, those of us who are the old school journal people, you know you'd go to the journal and find this article, but then you'd find something else in the journal, so, oh, this is pretty good too. But because they are doing everything electronically, they don't have that experience. They believe it is important to, quote, stay connected. Thus, their phones are always at hand. And classes that prohibit cell phone use interrupt their connections. They have very different conceptions of copyright, intellectual property, and plagiarism rules. And it has to do with the way in which their music is sampled and the making of mixtapes and mashups. So I guess what I'm saying is we actually have to go over all this stuff with them. I'm not saying that they should be allowed to plagiarize. We need to explain to them carefully what constitutes plagiarism. And I'm offering these observations not to suggest that we have to adapt to their standards, but rather to suggest that it is important to know where they are so that we can do a better job of understanding them and assisting them in the classroom and beyond. A decade ago, when people referenced the digital divide, they were talking solely about the way that social status, things like race or class or ethnicity, kept some students from accessing electronic information. But with the advent of smartphones, tablet computing, and other mobile devices, electronic communication has become ubiquitous. Even in developing nations, mobile devices provide access to information and global communications in the classrooms. The new digital divide is that which exists between generations. So as I said, the teacher on the flip phone is unable to keep up with his or her smartphone using students to maintain, for example, live Twitter feeds or classroom blogs. When our students can access information and knowledge via iTunes U and open access online classrooms, we have to create more imaginative and engaging spaces in our courses. Okay. So this next point is probably going to be the most controversial thing I say, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that is, I think that hip-hop can be an important cultural vehicle for connecting with new century students. Now, before I lose the entire audience, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that the over 40 crowd should adopt the hip-hop aesthetic, okay? I'm not telling you to go there. But rather, the anthropologist in me believes it's important to know as much about a culture with which you work as possible. For instance, when teaching Puerto Rican students in North Philadelphia, I began a deep and rigorous study of Puerto Rican culture and the specifics of the 2 Puerto Rican communities that made their way to Philadelphia. Knowing more about those cultures helped me plan relevant learning activities. It increased my communications with the parents, and it boosted student success. Knowing more about those cultures did not make me Puerto Rican. Similarly, when I moved to California, I needed to do a same kind of research as I worked with Chicano and Mexican national students. Again, knowing more about Mexican and Mexican-American culture did not make me Mexican or Mexican-American. It made me better able to serve the needs of the students who sat before me each day. So today's students, as I said, are in some ways a new breed, and as I've called them, new century students. Because of their deep connection to hip-hop, they're something like shapeshifters. They do not fit neatly into the rigid categories of race, class, gender, or national origin that we've relied upon to make distinctions or to create hierarchy. Their sports heroes include Kobe Bryant and Jeremy Lin, Gabby Douglas and Lolo Jones. They listen to Justin Bieber. Well, maybe ain't nobody listening to Justin no more. Justin is crazy, right? And Bruno Mars and Nicki Minaj. They're more likely to be receptive of students and people who are gay and lesbian, and they can actually separate out hip-hop traditions. Where baby boomers and their parents hear it all as noise, and I just want to remind you that our parents called rock and roll and rhythm and blues noise. They point out that there are important differences between hip-hop artists. There's a difference for them between Lil Wayne and Immortal Technique, or Lil Kim and Anna Tijoux. They know that this culture that they've created is a mashup with permeable boundaries, that this culture is simultaneously sacred and profane, with deep religious convictions and an embrace of all things secular. MCs like Lupe Fiasco or Omar Offendum don't hide their Muslim faith. They work in local, national, and global contexts with music and film about Trayvon Martin and Arab Spring. And I think I can bring up one of these for you, so if you hold on a second. Do this right.
Heard him say the revolution won't be televised. Al Jazeera proved him wrong. Twitter has him paralyzed. 80 million strong and ain't no longer gonna be terrorized. Organized, mobilized, vocalized. On the side of truth, the Medunya's living proof that it's a matter of time for the chickens home to roost. Bouazizi lit the hoof. And it slowly ignited the fire within Arab people to fight it. From Tunis to Khan Yunis, the new moon shines bright as the man's spoon was his masses. The man writes in the spell rumors of disunity, communally removing the tumors. Rotten rumors. We're making headway, chanting down the dictators, getting rid of dead weight, opening the floodgates like the streets of Jeddah. But we've been empowered to speak, and though the future is uncertain, man, at least it isn't bleak. When our children can be raised not in a cage, but on a peak, the inheritance of Mother Earth and meek. Freedom isn't given by oppressors, it's demanded by oppressed. Freedom lovers, freedom fighters, free to gather and protest for their God-given rights, for the freedom of the press. We know freedom is the answer. The only question is, who's next?
It's very bad for my government. I haven't food, I haven't anything. Me and my children, I will die today.
Time to push, and we ain't falling back now. Time to fight, 'cause we are all we have now. Do you hear me calling out for backups? Try to keep a lookout for better days. Time to push, and we ain't falling back now. Time to fight, we are all we have now. Do you hear me calling out for backups? Try to keep a lookout for better days.
Storm, pleasure to be born. News media disseminated heaven's gate level of alarm. Third person
to dictate.
Now, I actually shared this video with some high school students at a high school in Hartford, Connecticut. And the teacher said, I've been trying to teach about Arab Spring with these kids, and they're not interested. But once you started with that, they had a million questions. They wanted to understand the parallels between, say, fighting for freedom in the U.S. and in Egypt, and this is really Egypt. And it was the first time that some of our students had ever got engaged in questions of world and global issues. Why? Because there was something about the way in which that presentation, so we went through the lyrics. There's a line in it that says they're God-given rights to freedom. And so we had this long discussion about, okay, but I thought they were Muslims. All right, but does that mean they don't believe in God? I mean, literally the kids tore the lyrics apart, trying to figure out what was going on. Those uprisings in the Arab world are fueled by the technologies, right? The ability to be on Twitter. And those of you who've been around for a few years know we had our own sort of civil disobedience in Wisconsin a couple years ago. And so we had people marching around the Capitol because of the governor's decision. And one of the things that happened was to feed all these marchers and protesters, there was a pizza parlor right near Ian's Pizza, with very famous pizza in Madison that has some pizza combinations that should be against the law. Come on, y'all, macaroni and cheese pizza. That's very wrong on so many levels. But what happened was people wanted, first of all, they could only serve the protesters because they had so many orders. And so people were wanting to pay for their pizza, and the pizza parlor owner said, no, all of these are paid for. And they're like, who paid for them? He says, well, we got a couple orders here from Ireland, there's some from New Zealand. The technologies allowed people around the world to see what was going on and to participate in the civil disobedience in ways that generations ago, this stuff was always local. And so we're teaching kids who are already in the world in some fundamental ways. Not only are they doing music, but they're doing film. And filmmakers like Eli Jacob Fantauzi, who makes global hip-hop films, like Inventos, Hip Hop Cubanos, and Homegrown Hip Life in Ghana. Now, what I have to tell you about Eli was, quote, a special ed student, but he had a mother who was savvy enough to get him out of there. And he eventually graduated from the University of California, Berkeley. He's an incredible filmmaker. He's finishing a film now on hip hop in Colombia. And we brought him to campus to talk about his work. And one of the questions was, well, how did you get to Cuba? He said, there are ways. He says, I don't need to tell you, but you could get to Cuba. So these young people are doing things that you and I never imagined doing. We just kind of went to school and did what the teacher said do, but their worlds are so much more expansive. These young people are not slackers who don't care about education. Quite the contrary, they desire to be deeply engaged in learning. But they don't want to receive a passive education where rote memorization and regurgitation passes for learning. They want to innovate and create and implement. They are, as hip-hop science educator Chris Emden of Teachers College, Columbia University says, science-minded. And as science-minded individuals, they want to do science rather than read about it. There are scholars like Jeff Duncan Andrade at San Francisco State and Patrick Camignon at the University of San Francisco and Ernest Morrell of Teachers College. Scholars like Dawn Alyssa Fisher of San Francisco State, and Elaine Richardson, AKA Dr. E of Ohio State University, and Maisha Wynn, who's a colleague of mine at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who understand why it's important for university scholars and researchers to stay engaged with communities and schools, as teachers and as community activists. Teacher College professor Mark Lamont Hill has found ways to engage media and conduct research. So many of you probably see Mark on either HuffPost Live, he's on CNN, he's been interviewed several times by Piers Morgan. So he's both in a broader media environment as well as on a college campus. Sammy Alim of Stanford University is working with hip hop in global context. Sammy actually is right now in Cape Town, South Africa, and working with some artists there. Sam Seidel is working with T.C. Ellis, and he's helped to document the work of the High School of the Recording Arts, where students who were previously headed for failure gain a second chance to put their knowledge and skills of popular culture and the arts to work for both fun and profit. Actually, LeBron James has invested heavily in the High School of Recording Arts. They do a number of PSAs encouraging students not to drop out of school. And so LeBron has just kind of bonded with these young people. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of having dinner with MC Light. Well, let's see where I am here. I think I showed this to students earlier today. Oh no, this is Sam Seidel's work.
Hello everybody,
Let's see if we
listen
can
to
skip.
me.
बच्चे जो
That's not what
देखते
we
हैं
want.
वही सीखते हैं. Welcome to all.
When I was 20 years old, I started teaching at a juvenile prison. While there were many things that separated us, I quickly discovered my students and I had one big thing in common: our love of hip hop. For the next few years, rap music became the main content for the classes I taught, and I saw disengaged students emerge as leaders and experts. Through engaging elements of hip hop culture together, students and I learned language arts, life skills, and to love each other and ourselves more. As I continued to observe the ways in which our education system is rigged against Black and Latino students and students from low-income communities, I asked myself what else we as educators could learn from hip-hop, the insanely innovative and influential global phenomenon that has emerged from those very same communities. When I say hip-hop, I'm not just talking about music or music, graffiti, and dance, which are considered its central elements. I'm referring to the blend of instincts, confidence, and ingenuity that develops in oppressed communities, as has been demonstrated through the evolution of hip-hop culture. I'm talking about a Jamaican teenager in the South Bronx taking two records of the same song and fading back and forth between them to create a new musical composition by playing the most danceable segment over and over. I'm talking about aspiring visual artists realizing they didn't need galleries to represent them for their work to be seen, and instead painting on train cars and instantly having an audience of hundreds of thousands. I'm talking about a high school dropout from the projects of Marcy using his entrepreneurial hustle and rap skills to go from selling drugs to selling CDs out of the trunk of his car to selling products at Macy's. This is what my colleagues and I call hip-hop genius, creative resourcefulness in the face of limited resources, or as it is often said in the hip-hop community, flipping something out of nothing. How can this audacious approach impact our education system? For starters, we need to exhibit the brash creativity of hip-hop's pioneers. Just as hip-hop producers sampled songs from other genres, creating unique new sounds to please audiences' ears, hip-hop educators can borrow from diverse models and improvise innovative blends of educational practices customized to meet students' needs. If that sounds too abstract, take a look at the High School for Recording Arts in Minnesota, where they've mixed project-based learning and competency-based assessment with artistic, vocational, and business training with dual enrollment at local colleges with a heavy dose of student leadership. We don't have to do the same thing that's been done before or follow one model. We can sample and mix multiple teaching techniques and school designs to find the blends that best serve our students. We also need to adopt the value hip-hop places on staying fresh. A hot beat yesterday was a hot beat yesterday. Whoever sets out to make a hot beat today has to do something new and different to remain relevant. The world is changing rapidly around us. The top 10 jobs in 2010 didn't exist 6 years earlier. Hip-hop's premium on freshness must permeate our schools. And we need to be resourceful. In the 1970s, thousands of families chose to replace their linoleum floors. In poor neighborhoods, the old linoleum was left in piles on the street. Young people, without access to playgrounds or dance classes, turned their parents' trash into dance floors and invented new moves like the windmill and the headspin to maximize its potential. Faced with our own resource constraints, educators need to find new platforms. What refuse could we be dancing on? And what are our new moves? Behind the mic, spray cans, turntables, and when it comes to their educations, students have brilliant ideas and instincts. Hip-hop genius is not just about teachers using hip-hop songs to get kids to succeed in traditional schools. It's about changing education to respect and build from young people's brilliance. It's about the incredible possibilities that occur when students are engaged, not as consumers, but as creators. We don't need to tweak the content inside existing traditional academic structures. We need to think outside the classroom and build institutions that are fundamentally more responsive to young people's interests and ingenuity. We need to create schools and school systems that not only teach hip-hop, they are hip-hop.
That was Sam Seidel, who works with the high school for the recording arts, in case you want to follow up with him. So as I mentioned, a couple years ago, I had the pleasure of having dinner with MC Lyte, who is arguably one of the most significant voices in hip-hop culture. And that dinner took place at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where Lyte had come to announce a partnership with our innovative First Wave program, the only spoken word scholarship program at a major university. Our First Wavers have appeared on Broadway. They have attended the Cultural Olympics at the London Olympics, and they've performed in Denver at the American Sociological Association Conference. One of our First Wave students, Jasmine Mans, was named one of Glamour magazine's top 10 collegiate women. Jasmine has had a book published in her sophomore year. So when people tell me, oh, the kids don't want to do anything, yeah, they do. They want to do more than what we want them to do. We have this marvelous opportunity to engage with the most exciting generation of young students the world has ever seen. Their passions and desires merge with new and exciting technologies. And they want teachers who will demand more of them than Googling some information and cutting and pasting it into a document. They want to do, and they want to create. They want to inspire and innovate. And they want to learn to think critically and analytically. They want to be serious about education. Thank you. So I don't know if you want me to take a few questions. Okay, great. I'm happy to entertain a few questions. Oh, okay. Yes.
CPS is currently kind of doing a big push, Chicago Public Schools, for the International Baccalaureate curriculum. And I wanted to know if you knew about the aspect of their writing or their planning is called global context.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said the why is it important I'm learning this,
Mm-hmm.
they're really pushing teachers to, to include that part of it. Like why is this important? How can this relate to my life, down the road? I just want to know, have you done anything with IB or?
So, I mean, IB is one of those things that creates yet another track for some students. And I.
Chicago are going wall to wall.
They're doing, everybody's going to do IB, okay. What I find most interesting about Chicago is they have one of the largest and most vibrant spoken word communities in the country. We come down here a lot to search for students to offer scholarships from the spoken word program, because we have tons of IB students, but we don't have tons of artists. So I'm not against the programs. But what I'm saying is, there are some kids who will struggle mightily to get through IB programs. Our graduation rates are not going to improve just by saying, oh, we're going to have this sort of high-stakes program, high-standards program. And unless the teachers are thinking differently about how kids might access IB, and I think I said this in one of the earlier sessions, I give a workshop in the summer for teachers who are advanced placement course teachers, and about the fact that we're missing a lot of kids in advanced placement. And my mantra when I speak to parents is, make sure your kids take an advanced placement course. They don't have to take all, but let them take one. And what they'll say back to me is, well, a teacher didn't recommend. I said, that's not what I say. Are you not paying taxes? Or if you're in a private school, are you not paying tuition? So you ought to have access to whatever's there. The problem I have, however, is that on the one hand, we're not getting all the kids who are eligible. Something like 75% of African American students who do well enough on the PSAT to take an advanced placement course never take one. And on the other hand, the kids who do take them, they're not taking them for the right reasons. They're taking them because it looks good on a transcript and they think it enhances their chances. So one of the things that struck me in a film on advanced placement is the dean at Stanford, Deborah Stipek, talked about the fact that when she figured out that maybe advanced placement wasn't the way to go, was that her own daughter took the French literature advanced placement and took the test. And she said when she came home that day after having taken the test, her first words were, whew, I never have to speak French again. So is that the reason why we would want them to take, wouldn't we want them to take it because they develop a love of and a deeper interest? So that's my concern about IB, that if the only thing we want to do is to ensure that kids get into, quote, college, as opposed to they develop a deeper, and that they have a deeper and richer educational experience. If IB is just more of the same, just more of it, I'm not sure how to make that successful for all kids. So, another question? Yes?
How can someone who maybe is unfamiliar with hip-hop become more familiar with it and sort of learn sort of those last tenets that Sam
This is not a flip question, but if you didn't know how to speak Spanish, what would you do?
I would listen to the Spanish news, watch the Spanish soap operas.
Okay, you literally have to, you'd have to study, right? And that's what I'm saying. I am in study mode myself. I have read more books on hip hop and gone to more performances in the last 3 or 4 years so that I can sort of be where kids are. I actually do teach a course called Pedagogical Flows Hip Hop in the K-12 classroom. But it's been a steep learning curve because I was one of those people, this is just noise. No. First of all, it's a very old tradition. It's like 40 years old, right? And I'm like, oh, that's right, Sugar Hill Gang, right? But to see its evolution, and particularly around what we might call the conscious movement. We run a public lecture series along with my course, and this year we're having a lot more industry people come and talk about. So we're having on Monday Jack Knight, who is a songwriter, and he's written for J-Lo and Diddy and a number of other people to talk about the process of songwriting and what actually happens. It's like seeing the sausage made. The following week, we're having a guy named Ebro Darden, who is the vice president of programming for Hot 97 in New York, which is the premier hip-hop radio station. And he's going to talk about, how do some things get played while other things don't get played? And what's the business driving and what's it trying to sell? So, my work has really been about figuring out, okay, how do we connect with these kids who they don't watch TV? They're doing all these other things, who communicate differently. And hip hop has become this vehicle. I have been as I said earlier, on 6 of the 7 continents. Everywhere I've been, I've encountered hip hop. I have graffiti photos from Brazil, Beijing, Australia. I mean, literally, it is a worldwide phenomenon, and we can keep our heads in the sand and pretend that it isn't, but this is what kids are engaged in. And I think we have an opportunity here, as opposed to saying, oh, we can't deal with any of this stuff. So it does require the reading, the study, for anything you'd want to know about. Okay, yes?
I guess as someone who grew up with the hip hop culture and sort of feeling like this is where I am anyway, I wonder, for education and for educators, it's really hard to stay even with the curve, but thinking about ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
How can we use our knowledge of hip hop or other cultures to identify emerging cultures,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can actually stay ahead of the field as opposed to
Yeah.
backing out?
And I think that is the tough thing. I mean, one of my own kids works in technology, and he's always telling me that, what we have, what the public has access to is not where the technology folks are. I mean, that they're so far ahead of us, literally. And in fact, I listened to a TED Talk given by John Negroponte in 1980, and he said, yeah, we're not going to use stylus, to get on these devices anymore. We're going to use our fingers. There was no smart technology. So there are people who are so far ahead of us. Steve Jobs had patents for things that didn't exist. You know how when your phone or somebody calls you and their number, you can just touch their number and call them back? He patented that idea, and there weren't any cell phones. So I think it's tough for teachers to stay ahead of this. And at this point, our big job is to just try to stay current. I'm not sure we can get ahead of some of these things. But one of the ways that we stay current is that we stay in communication. So I mentioned to students earlier, we participate in a Twitter conversation every Tuesday night. It takes place at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern, called #HipHopEd. And we talk about, okay, well, how can you do this in a classroom? And what are some of the ideas that we can incorporate? And so this conversation is wide-ranging. We have artists, we have industry people, we have teachers, we have community activists, all thinking about how do we engage these kids. Last Tuesday's conversation was about how do we deal with sort of the negative stuff, because that's where the kids are quick to go to, and kind of flip that and get them to go to more positive images, because the negative stuff is just proliferates. It's everywhere. But that's true in every form, not just hip hop. There's negative stuff in fashion, there's negative stuff in movies. I mean, and so in some ways we do have to provide them with alternatives that speak to them. And that's the kind of work we're trying to do right now. Yes?
This isn't really a question, it's more of a comment. I think that your being here in Loyola is really wonderful.
Thank you.
Timely,
Thank you.
because the large Louder Than a Bomb competition for spoken word is actually about to kick off
Okay.
in the next couple of weeks. So I invite anyone. I'm actually a coach at the Roswell High School. We have a spoken word team.
Mhm.
There's going to be competitions if you're interested in looking at the curriculum. I mean, definitely, this is something that you're interested in, but you're not fully aware of how to do it. The community is very welcoming to helping educators understand a little bit more about the process, and it's definitely a really good show. So, inviting anyone who is interested in, if you have any questions, and
Great. There is a film, documentary film called Louder Than a Bomb that focuses on the Chicago Louder Than a Bomb competition. It won all these awards at Sundance. And so you could actually just look at the film. It follows 4 kids or 5 kids. It follows their whole lives and their process. Just amazing. There are more than 400 hip-hop education programs in this country at the high school and college level. And so folks like Marta Diaz in New York is compiling them so that you can at least see the compendium. There's something known as the Hip Hop Archives. Marceline Morgan is the curator, and they are housed at Harvard. So trust me, people are figuring out this thing is serious and it's not going anywhere. And we need to get ahead of it from the standpoint of putting more positive stuff out there for the kids. Yes?
I was really moved earlier by the video you showed us about climate change with the spoken word artist promoting that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then just now I was thinking about the sort of resourcefulness of hip hop you were talking about using discarded linoleum and they put it into new uses. I'm wondering if you see a potential to promote sustainability and environmental issues through this in
Many of the pieces that the students perform take on some of the toughest issues you can imagine, and the environment is way up there. It's one of the things that they are deeply concerned about. And I'm excited about the merger of science and hip hop, because when we first started out, people were like, well, I can see this in English and literacy. Oh, I can see this a little bit in the history and social studies. Oh, I can see it in music. But, you know, we're in science and math, and what we're finding, we're starting to connect up with the science and math people in really powerful ways, and it's really been helpful. Chris Emden, who I featured, and he's the science genius that I showed earlier. Chris has worked with Marie Curie Middle School in New York, and so I went to visit, and these kids were in a math class, and their challenge was, and he explains to them, he says, a cipher, you know, when you sit together as a group, he says, that's all scientists do. He said, you know, these journal pieces is nothing but, it's like a cipher. And when people write back against something you wrote, it's just really a rap battle, okay? They're having a battle about, you know, the validity of science. So the latest rap battle, of course, is around mammography. So, you know, does it work? Does it? No, it doesn't work. Yeah, it worked, you know. So he puts the kids in these little cipher groups, and they were working on, they had to come up with a hip-hop hook for mathematics they were studying. And these are like sixth graders. And this one group was doing a piece on fractions. And the hook was, well, a fraction's just a part of a whole. I said, a fraction's just a part of a whole. You know, a fraction's just a part of a whole, right? And so the other kid had the piece over explaining fractions. He says, Gloria, every time someone says the word fraction in that classroom, the entire class goes, but a fraction's just a part of a whole. You know, a fraction's just a part of a whole. Now think about kids and quote fractions and how they go, ooh, right? But we're figuring out ways in which multimodal ways of reaching them become really important. And I really want to underscore that because you start there doesn't mean you stay there. What you haven't seen is I have a playlist for my class. When they come in, music is playing, and I got everything on there. That's something I used to do as a middle school teacher and a high school teacher in Philly. And yeah, I started with the stuff they liked, but I also introduced them to stuff that they wouldn't ordinarily encounter. And I'll never forget one day asking them, well, okay, I'm gonna put some music on, what do you wanna hear? And one of my, quote, recalcitrant learners said, can you put on that song, you know, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun. He said, that's my joint, you know? So if I had kind of forced that down his throat and said, this is good music and what you listen to is bad music, no. But that's our role as educators to start where they are, to use what they know, but also to move them past that. So that's, to me, hip hop is a vehicle. It is not the end game here. So, yes?
I know you said when you go into classrooms and see signs, no cell phones, it drives you crazy. I was wondering if you see any other things when you walk into classrooms, specifically in regards to discipline or like classroom management.
We don't have that much time, honey. I could go home.
That like overshadow or would make culturally relevant pedagogy like impossible.
What, you know, at my own institution, I have these wonderful, deeply committed young people who want to be teachers, many of whom are working in like what we call SWIA, the Student Wisconsin Education Association, student iterations of the Teachers Association. And so they'll often ask me to come and speak at their meetings. And when they come and ask me, can you come and speak to us about discipline? I always say the same thing. I say, honey, that's like asking me, telling me, look, I just got engaged. Can you give me the name of a good divorce lawyer? Like, how about enjoying the engagement? How about enjoying the fact that you're going to get married? Where's the excitement about the teaching? The discipline is going to come. You're going to have to learn to do that. But no matter what we do with you at Wisconsin, I don't care how many A's are on the transcript, I don't care how good your cooperating teacher says you are, when you leave here, you're going to be a beginner. And you're going to make beginner mistakes. So give yourself permission to make mistakes. Give yourself permission to begin. Trust me, if I ever encounter those kids I had that first year, I have so many mea culpas, I'm so sorry, because I didn't know what I was doing. The dirty little secret of teacher education is that we can't teach you how to teach. You will not become a teacher until you practice. Now, it's also true of law, medicine, and any profession. We can give you background knowledge, but you don't become a lawyer until you practice law. You don't become a physician until you practice medicine. And you get better as you go along. So, yeah, there's all kinds of things that I see people do. I will, however, the anthropologist in me will always want to know what's the larger context. Because just walking in and seeing something, you may not know what you're seeing. Yeah. Okay, can I, one more? Yeah?
I've worked with enough faculty in different types of retention programs in higher education institutions where, because it's a retention program, it's really geared around teaching that kind of cultural capital that gets students to succeed in college. And a lot of this sounds like transformative education. What I hear from them is, well, this is great, but you'll probably get maybe one or two or three teachers who teach in this style that's really engaging. You need to learn how to master the professor who is going to teach in all the ways that sort of speak against your first point about student-engaged learning. What might be your response to that idea, to kind of merge the idea of transformative education with the practicality of what happens and what other professors do?
So I guess my bottom line question is always, what are you trying to produce? What are you trying to get in the end? If what you're trying to get in the end is a few people who are successful, then you just keep on doing what you're doing. But if what you're actually after is for cohorts of excellence, you got to change. You have to change in some fundamental ways. So that's always going to be the question for me. What are you trying to produce? I think I talked a little bit earlier about moving past this depth versus coverage kind of thing and thinking that I'm being rigorous because people are failing. No, you're not. You're being obstinate. And you're also believing that the most important person in that room is you. So that's me. That's my little soapbox. Okay. Am I keeping people? Yes.
I'm thinking, going back to the culturally relevant pedagogy, I think that's a really important component in the classroom. But I feel that maybe a few teachers or a lot of teachers may say that, well, I don't have time for cultural relevant pedagogy because I have to focus on teaching to the test and making sure my students can pass these tests. So what would you say to those teachers and how to do that and still implement culturally?
So one of the things that I think is the saddest thing that I see, maybe this answers her question a little bit, is what I would call disempowered teachers that think they can't. I can't do this because of that. And until we get teachers to a place where they understand that they actually do have some power, we're going to keep seeing that. I learned early in my teaching career, if I don't ask you something, then I don't have to, if I don't ask permission, then I don't have to seek it, right? My very first year I was teaching, I wanted to take my students on a field trip, but all the buses had been commissioned, and so I wanted to know if I could take them on public transportation, which was the kids I was teaching in South Philly. You weren't supposed to take them out the building, right? And I said to the principal, I said, so can I take these kids on this trip downtown? So he was like, now that you've asked me, I have to tell you what the rule is. I said, so are you saying I can't take them? He said, now that you've asked me, I have to tell you what the rule is. I said, oh, so I can take them? He said, now that you have asked me, I have to tell you what the rule is. I finally got it. I said, I ain't asked you nothing. So there's a level of risk-taking that people engage in to be great at anything, whether it's athletics, the arts, scientists, administrators. They're the people who say, you know what, I know this ain't the way we've been doing it, but I'm gonna do this thing. So we are talking about a sense of courage that we have to cultivate. Now, can you do this in year one? Probably not. But I had gotten so good at community involvement that my principals couldn't get rid of me. They would have an insurrection because the community went, no, you leave her alone, right? Because I invested deeply in that community, and they understood that I cared deeply about their kids. So I know you have the sort of fresh enthusiasm of being brand new, but it's not a bad idea to just lay back and get the landscape, and then begin to figure out where can you build coalition and alliances so that, you know, my brother actually taught me this when I first went for a tenure track position, and, you know, you're so frustrated, you know, and scared about, oh, am I gonna be able to write this stuff, and are they gonna give me tenure? And my brother, who has nothing to do with academia, but speaks in sports metaphors because he knows I can understand that, he said, you just have to go there and be Reggie Jackson. I said, huh? He said, you gotta hit 3 home runs in October. That's all you gotta do. He said, they don't have to like you, but if you hit 3 home runs in October, girl, you in. That's what I did. I wrote those pieces that were home runs. So I didn't really care anymore whether people liked me or I fit in. I did, you know, I took some risk. The Dream Keepers is the most risky academic book of its time, because it's not written in a way that academic books were written. But I took that risk because I was trying to hit a home run. I'm keeping folks from dinner, so I'm gonna stop. Okay, thank you.